Nano Machine by Unjam. Chapter 435 To Changbai Mountains. Part 1. It took a long time for former Lord Chunji to calm down. The news filled with surprises about the Sky Demon sword and the course made his heart tremble. How could all of this be? It was considered that the legitimacy of the demonic cult was cut off after the 7th generation Lord, Chun Muhue. A false sword was replaced by the actual Sky Demon sword. The blood of the heavenly family. But despite the huge gap in time, a new Chun Ma was born in the demonic cult. This old man forgot to formally greet you. Chunji staggered as he stood up, straightening his back. He slowly began to kneel on one knee and clasped his hands. Grandfather. Chun Yuan tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. Chunji, the 22nd Lord of the Great Sky Demon Order, greets the current Chun Ma. Tears were falling from the corners of his wrinkled eyes. It was a joy that the Sky Demon sword was once again brought into their lives. And it wasn't some other person from the clan, but his very own grandson. Chun Yuan, who looked at that, spoke. Grandfather, this is troublesome. What is troublesome? This is the happiest day of this old man's life. He's serious. Chunji loved the demonic cult. Not just as the Lord, but he cherished just being a member of the cult. Therefore, he disappeared, intending to carry all the burdens and sacrifice himself. He is a true cultist. He felt the same respect after meeting Ranyang, the great woman who sacrificed herself in the royal shrine for many years. If only the heads of the 6 clans within the cult had acted like them, the demonic cult wouldn't have suffered. As the emotions subsided, the trembling of his heart stopped as well. Chun Yuan asked with worry. Grandfather. You said your memory isn't perfect. Would you like to talk after you rest a little more? To that, Chunji shook his head and answered. No. I have had enough sleep. He smiled widely and looked at the sword, which had transformed back into a wrist guard, and his expression changed into a serious one. Yowana, the fact that you obtained the Sky Demon sword, and that you obtained the cores before they fell into the hands of the Blade God 6 martial clan might be the guidance of Chun Ma. Guidance? Suddenly, Chun Yuan remembered the illusion he saw when he held the Sky Demon sword for the first time. At that time, a man who was supposed to be Chun Ma had spoken. It will take a long time. I don't think it will happen in my lifetime. Why did those words come to his mind? Maybe it's just the thought of the people who stay in the cult. But one thing is for sure, it seems like something bad is going to come. This could be fate. Now is the time for everything to be revealed. Chunji, who nodded at his words, started recalling stuff. According to what you said, as time passed, it must have been around 25 years ago. Chunji, who was the lord of that time, had a great reputation. During the reign of Chunji, the demonic cult was expanding its territory to the west, the domain of the forces of evil. And the forces of evil was led by one of the 5 strongest warriors, King Hangyan, who had defeated the former head Okhyun. Even though he was called a ferocious monarch, he was unable to defeat the army of the demonic cult, which was led by Chunji, and he ended up getting pushed back. It was a time when we continued into the west. Even after having a few victories, there seemed to be a lot of dissatisfaction among the 6 clans. I remember. At that time, everyone seemed puzzled at the order to subjugate the West, despite us having the power and number to take over the Yulin faction, which was in the north. Mara Kim also added to Chunji's words, as he remembered those days. At that, Chunji seemed upset. I can say it out loud now, but at that time, I didn't see another choice. This old man had made an oath to him. Oath? With Saint Guyong, the former leader of the Shaolin Temple. 70 years ago, Chunji had passed the 6 tests of the academy. Chun Inji was so talented that he managed to pass the 6 tests, which no one had passed for a long time, and not long after that, he took over the title of Lord. It had been 50 years or so since I first saw Guyong. Chun Inji, who was full of spirit and energy, tried to move to the north, the place of the Yulin, just as the previous lords of the demonic cult had done. In fact, there was a time when he was trying to go north until the Hunan province. At that time, Saint Guyong was the one who stopped me. Saint Guyong, the then leader of the Shaolin Temple, was called the Enlightened One and was respected in the Yulin. However, he wasn't famous for anything other than that. However, Saint Guyong, who brought 10 disciples and 108 Hanjin, was different from the rumors. I found out for the first time the fact that many hidden geniuses were in Wulin. Surprisingly, Chun Inji, who was called one of the 5 strongest warriors, experienced defeat for the first time. As a result of the battle, which lasted for half a day, he suffered severe internal injuries and was defeated. Grandfather lost? Even Mara Kim was shocked. It was his first time hearing about it. For the first time I managed to learn the true power of the Shaolin Temple. They seldom participated in any events, but once they moved, they weren't a force that could be tackled. That was why you didn't take over the north? Well, you can think of it that way. One thing, in the beginning, it was because of my pride. Pride? At that time, I lost to Saint Guyong. I made an oath with him. The oath was to meet once every 5 years at a fixed place and compete in martial arts. Chun Inji, who had suffered his first defeat ever, wanted to fight him again. At that time, Saint Guyong suggested, Ba, Lord Chun, let us meet again and compete, but if you keep bringing your army every time, there will only be more casualties. Wouldn't it be better if only you and I fight each other? At first, Saint Guyong suggested meeting once every 10 years. However, 10 years was too long for the lord of the demonic cult. As Chun Inji asked it to be every 5 years, Saint Guyong accepted, and their relationship started to bloom. It's embarrassing, but for the first 20 years that I met him, not once did I ever win. Chun Inji constantly honed himself to win. However, Saint Guyong, who had the will to prevent the demonic cult from moving north, also didn't neglect his training. Every time, the result was the same. During the 4 meetings, the two of them had a strange affinity as rivals. The fact that we did not go to the north in the end for the past years. Chun Yawan decided to cut his words, not wanting to hurt his grandfather's pride. Not caring, Chun Inji smiled. He, you take this old man too lightly. The 5th time I competed with him, I defeated him for the first time. The 5th battle ended in victory. A long-awaited victory, and despite defeating Saint Guyong, Chun Inji was unable to move north. The 25-year relationship was enough time for them to understand and respect each other. Since I beat him for the first time, we turned into healthy rivals. The relationship between the two of them was strange. Starting out as enemies, they turned into friends. After that, Chun Inji, considering his friendship with Guyong, decided to give up on the north and turned his attention to the west, the forces of evil. From a political standpoint, Saint Guyong was nothing less than a hero. However, only the 2 people who battled knew that fact. Whenever I suffered from political affairs or had concerns, I would meet up with him and talk about the deep dissatisfactions I had. He was a true Buddhist. It seemed like he missed those past days. Chun Inji's expression turned dark. And then one day, it happened. As usual, Chun Inji headed to the promised place to meet with Saint Guyong. He waited for a fortnight but was unable to meet him. He was wondering if he should wait any longer, but then he found information. Someone from the Shaolin Temple said that some leader went missing from the mountains southeast of the Anhui fortress, and Saint Guyong went there directly. Thinking that it was inappropriate to be involved in the affairs of Yulin factions, he wondered if he should wait a little more or return. However, Chun Inji, who was conflicted, knew that he wouldn't get too many chances to meet Gu Yong. Not being able to overcome his curiosity, he headed to Mt Biam. The southeast of Anhui Fortress wasn't far from the demonic cult, so he thought of heading there alone. After 5 days, I arrived at Mt Biam and tried to find out the whereabouts of Saint Guyong. Naturally, Saint Guyong and the other monks of the temple would be trying to find the missing person. However, Chun Inji, who was on Mt Biam, found something deep in the forest. It was a coincidence, but there were traces of a fight. Several traces. He found traces of a technique that belonged to the Shaolin Temple and traces of a technique that he had only seen once before. Extreme Art of the Blade God. Chen Yuan, who guessed it, opened his mouth. Extreme Art of the Blade God? It's a technique of the Blade God's 6 martial clan. Oh, how did you find out the name? I heard it from one of their members. Chun Inji couldn't hide his surprise. Either way, it was the right answer, and Chun Inji nodded. Right. It's the extreme art of the Blade God. This old man who passed the 6th test in the academy saw their ultimate technique, which seemed like the greatest one in the world, and it seemed like Guyong had fought with one of them. Since it was the first time he ever came across such a shocking technique, Chun Inji clearly remembered the slashes. However, his techniques were inherited from the cult's hundreds of years of legacy, so he didn't think deeply about the new slashes. It was because he thought that he would never cross paths with a master of the sword technique. However, upon discovering the slashes, Chun Inji decided that something felt unusual and tried to find Saint Guyong right away. In the traces I found, the Shaolin Temple technique used was a lot lower than Guyong's level, so I guessed it was the traces from the missing leader. Saint Guyong had reached Mt Biam before Chun Inji. Realizing that, Chun Inji tried to find him in a hurry. He searched for 2 days and finally found traces of martial artists and footprints heading to the east. I hurriedly followed and reached a gorge, which was in the west of Zhejiang province. There, I was lucky enough to find Saint Guyong. It was literal luck. It was because there were sounds of battle from the side of the gorge. So he hurried there. Saint Guyong was competing with an unknown master. The monks of Shaolin Temple, who were his company, all turned into defiled corpses at the bottom of the valley, and Saint Guyong seemed to be struggling. Chun Inji joined in and helped Guyong. Starting with the basics, we used every technique we could think of, but their martial arts, it definitely depended on the blade technique and the blade god. No matter how excellent the martial arts were of the unknown man when Chun Inji joined, the situation reversed. Although it took a while, they were able to defeat the enemy. Saint Guyong said something while we were subduing them. Lord Chun, you can't kill them. The reason was unknown, but it was a request, so a few people were captured without being killed. Saint Guyong was tired from the long battle. When he recovered the next day, Chun Inji heard about what had happened. Lord Chun. They are the descendants of the Blade God. He expected that to some extent, but it was still shocking. The descendants of that person had disappeared a long time ago, but they surfaced again? This old man thought that this only started when Saint Guyong was looking for that missing man. But I was wrong. It wasn't? Chun Inji, the former lord, answered Chen Yuan's question. Saint Guyong knew about them. Knew about them? Like their existence? Yes. Saint Guyong revealed the truth, pointing to the descendants. I didn't want to tell you, strongest one, but since Lord Chun seems to know a little about them, I'll tell you. Ba. 500 years ago, the Blade God first appeared in Wulin. The first victim was Chun Muhui, the 7th lord of the demonic cult. The Blade God, who killed one of the 5 strongest warriors, disappeared and reappeared exactly 2 years later. That was Mt Song. Huh? How do you know that? When Chen Yuan knew about it, Chun Inji couldn't help but be puzzled. Mara Kim answered it. After you disappeared, the Lord passed the 6th test in the academy, and when he entered the cave, he learned about the legacy of the sword demon. What? You passed the 6th test? Chun-enji couldn't hide his surprise. Thinking about it, it would be strange if Chen Yuan, who had such outstanding skills, was unable to pass the 6th test. You keep surprising this old man. Hoo-hoo. After he calmed down from the surprise, Chun-enji spoke again. The place he appeared again, 2 years later, was Mt Song. At that time, Gong Yun, a master in the Shaolin Temple, was assassinated despite being one of the 5 strongest. It was even shocking that Chun Muhui, the lord of the demonic cult, had been murdered. Gong Yun was a monk who had been respected by many in Yulin. This was why Yulin was dead set on catching the mysterious person who suddenly appeared and killed people. The 9 great clans and the smaller clans had the same wish too. The result, you might know, was a failure. After that, 2 years later, Yuk Jinkum of the forces of evil was killed by the Blade God. At that time, the only person who stopped him was the sword demon. Having passed the 6th test, you know why the academy was built? To prepare for the Blade God and his descendants who will appear in the future. Right. However, that isn't the only reason. Then, as 2 strong people of the Yulin were murdered, a secret group was formed within the faction to track him down. Chun-enji took a deep breath once and said, the name of the secret group which Saint Guyong belonged to was Unjam. Chapter 436. To Changbai Mountains. Part 2. Unjam. Chen Yuan and the great guardian Mara Kim were both shocked. Unjam. It was supposed to be a legendary group, only heard about. Unjam literally meant hidden martial artist. Un is taken from the word which means a group of martial artists, a hidden group of warriors. According to the legends, Unjam is comprised of warriors from all the great clans of Wulin. However, since not much is known about it after 500 years, the people of Wulin regarded it as a false rumor. However, Unjam is an organization which actually exists. Saint Guyong belonged to it. Such a group existing was shocking. And their purpose wasn't to relay their own techniques, but to find and block the descendants of the Blade God who would appear in the future. Among the factions of the past, there were many who were concerned about the Blade God who suddenly appeared. That was a natural reaction. Most of the 5 strongest warriors of that time were killed by that one man. It was nowhere like the usual battles of the Wulin, where clans fought each other for victory or defeat. The unprecedented murders were enough to raise doubts. They prepared differently from our cult. Unlike the sword demon, who was focused on cultivating warriors who could defeat the Blade God, Unjam focused on tracking his existence. But there was a huge problem. The Blade God left no traces. It was as if he never existed. Giving up would have been better, but the Unjam was sure that he would show up again. It was like they were able to foresee the distant future. And that prediction came true. It was said that the people in Unjam, who searched day and night, found traces of the Blade God's descendant for the first time. It was more than 200 years before the Blade God disappeared. Then, that means that the extreme art of the Blade God was found 200 years back. It was just a trace. Unjam found some marks, which were believed to be from the Blade God's descendant on Mt Baikyang. They were all elated about finding some traces, but there was something odd about it. The sword marks they found seemed far less complete than the marks left on the bodies of the Shaolin monks who were recently killed. As if they weren't inheriting the martial arts of the Blade God, the senior of Unjam said the newly found marks were imitating the previous ones. Unjam, senior? Chen Yuan had some doubts about that senior who was mentioned, but he didn't ask about it. Chun-enji continued to speak. And after the traces were found, his whereabouts were unknown, but 5 years later, traces were once again found to the north. and the traces were discovered after a very long time. However, the traces found this time were far more advanced than the ones at Mt. Baekyang. Of course, even if it was better, the traces still seemed lacking compared to the Blade God, but there was considerable progress. Did Unjam find them? No. It was as if they completely hid themselves, leaving nothing but a few traces behind. Even the Unjam who pursued them were beginning to have doubts. Even though time kept passing, the fact that there were traces meant that the descendant of the Blade God would appear once again. Therefore, Unjam decided to not give up and continued to search. Since the first day Unjam was first formed, they have found numerous traces of the Blade God's sword technique. And we were able to discover a fact through those traces. Fact? The traces left behind by that descendant were turning more and more similar to the Blade Gods. The traces were becoming closer and closer to perfection. In the end, it was safe to say that he would completely display the perfect technique of the Blade God. Unjam came up with that hypothesis. There are descendants of the Blade God, but they weren't taught by the Blade God in person. Chen Yuan nodded, agreeing to it. A reasonable hypothesis. Although the Blade God's martial arts are more difficult to learn, the fact that the Blade God could use them meant that some kind of training existed. However, just because he wasn't seen anywhere didn't mean that the training methods weren't taught or that the descendants were all self-taught. The one thing which matters is that what the Unjam and the past lords of the cult were worried about was gradually turning into reality. The Sword Demon and Unjam were concerned that the Blade God would appear again. It was because they knew that even if the three major factions joined forces, they would still be unable to handle the Blade God if he appeared with skilled warriors. At that time, the thing they were worried about finally happened. They were beginning to appear. No matter how secretly they moved, anyone was bound to get caught. They realized that people of the Blade God's 6 martial clan hid within the Wulin, and people tried to find them. We noticed it because the masters inside the Unjam were starting to disappear one after the other. As a hidden organization, Unjam consisted of a small number of masters. As a result, when 3 or more masters went missing, people noticed that the Blade God's descendants became braver. The Blade God's 6 martial clan was researching a method to teach their martial arts. Then the Shaolin master, Master Juam? At Chen Yuan's question, the former lord nodded his head. Master Juam also belonged to Unjam, and he decided to be bait. Traces of the extreme art of the Blade God appeared in Anhui, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, and Master Juam tried to lure them out. As you said, Master Juam did a great job. It was his sacrifice which brought the first contact with those monsters. Saint Guyong was the one who told Chun Inji all that. Chun Inji, who learned all about Unjam from Guyong, remembered it. He thought that perhaps helping them uncover the descendants of the Blade God might change the future of the demonic cult. Actually, I had no choice. When Guyong revealed it to me, he said it with the intention that I would join him. Saint Guyong, who said that he was going to the base of Unjam along with the captured men, asked Chun Inji to cooperate with him. I thought that it would be good for the cult. Too many problems in a short amount of time. There was a saying, to scare snakes by stomping on the grass, but no one could do that, as no one knew where the descendants were even hiding. And that was how I turned into a member of the Unjam and worked with them. That was 20 years ago. More than half of the hidden secrets about the former Lord Chun Inji have been revealed. Mara Kim turned bitter as the story ended. Lord, no, former Lord, has such a sense of duty and carried that heavy burden all alone. It was by no means an easy task for the Lord of the cult to give up everything and sacrifice himself. It was something that had to be respected. But how did grandfather get into the hands of the Blade God's 6 martial clan? Chun Inji asked with a puzzled expression at Chen Yuan's question. Aren't you curious about the captured descendants of the Blade God? There is a worm in their heads. and when you try to extract it, it blows up. Chen Yuan had been able to obtain a lot of information by capturing the people of the Blade God's 6 martial clan. Based on his experience, he thought that Unjam would have come up with a way to get information. With a smile, Chen Enji spoke. "Ha! Yuan, you are making a strong impression on this old man." "Right. You are right. Before we could get anything, their heads would explode, and they died." He praised him, but Chen Enji's voice seemed bitter. It was because the sacrifice of Master Juam had turned insignificant. As Chen Enji joined, many more descendants were captured by the Unjam, but they failed to find information every time. The masters in Unjam and this old man thought that it wouldn't work this way. 20 years ago, they encountered unexpected enemies. Enemies who seemed invincible. The man who seemed invincible didn't fall even when the 5 strongest warriors came together to kill him. He appeared with 4 men in iron masks. Thankfully Chen Enji and the others were able to respond thanks to the Unjam masters who were hiding and gathered close by. Old colleagues. Enjoy this. Kukul. At first, no one understood what the man said. The man who seemed invincible lost and the others were caught. Managing to subdue them, they took off the iron masks. They were the dead masters of Unjam who died in the hands of the Blade God 16 years ago. They couldn't find any reason for what happened. They tried to find numerous answers to solve their questions, and while trying, the masters in iron masks' heads would explode, and they would die. Among the 4, only one faced a different death. He was Master Juam, who sacrificed himself in the past. Shockingly, we managed to get information before Master Juam died. Although not all the information could be remembered, Master Juam told them important facts about how he was abducted. He said that those people held a huge force and that they reached a level where they could deal with the entire Wulin. Master Juam, who gave the information, died pretty soon after. In fact, he was severely wounded during the battle. There was no way they could have saved him. But unlike the other 3, he died normally. With the permission of Gu Yong, the brain was dissected to look for the reason, and that was when we learned about it. The brain of Master Juam had contracted. As if the brain had gone into hibernation. While examining, one thing was noticed. It seemed like something was affecting the functioning and will of the body's owner. While listening to the story, Chen Yuan looked at Chen Enji with trembling eyes. It was because one question he had was solved. "Grandfather, don't tell me that you joined because of it?" "Right. You're right. It was to infiltrate their base directly." He didn't deny what was running through Chen Yuan's brain. The reverse health preservation was created by Bodhidharma, something which needed extreme mental strength. Unlike other methods, this method had a great effect in stabilizing the mind and body. Did the former lord disappear to learn more about them? Mara Kim thought that Chen Enji had left to restore the demonic cult to its former glory. To that, Chen Enji answered. That is the reason, but it was also to learn the Sky Demon Sword. Chen Enji believed that only the Sky Demon Sword could oppose the Blade God's 6 martial clan. However, learning it took a lot of time, and it seemed impossible to complete it. I was going to stay in the cult until I mastered it. But the more he began to depend on the spirit of Buddhism, the lesser the Sky Demon Sword unfolded. As the secondary energy began to grow in his body, Chen Enji decided that it would be better to hand the cult over to Chen Yuzhong and the 6 clans before they noticed the changes in his body, and left the cult earlier than planned. Thud. Mara Kim knelt down and spoke in a trembling voice. Ho how, could you go through all that on your own? If only you let me know, Pat. At that, Chen Enji gently placed his hand on Mara Kim's shoulder. Great Guardian. Your mission is to protect the Chen Ma and the next Chen Ma of the cult. How could this old man overlook your role? Ah, grandfather. Chen Yuan was speechless at the sacrifices Chen Enji had made. It wasn't that he was kidnapped by them. Rather, he let himself get kidnapped so he could find out information about the real enemies. To win a war, several tricks will have to be used. Chapter 437. To Changbai Mountains. Part 3. Chun-Inji, the former lord of the demonic cult, looked at the two people's reactions and continued his story. After years of preparation, this grandfather of yours and Saint Guyong, with a strong sense of duty in our hearts, pretended to be subdued and infiltrated them. Since this was the most important part, Chun Yuan concentrated on his words. It was said that they were captured. When they woke up after losing consciousness from the battle, he arrived at a place he presumed to be the base of the Blade God 6 martial clan. I was prepared for anything, yet, it was a difficult time. They didn't try to immediately brainwash the captured men. At first, they tried to persuade them into voluntarily giving out information about the Yulin and the demonic cult. Natural, they didn't give in, and it didn't take long for the polite people to resort to threats and torture. They did everything they could think of to make Guyong and I give in. Thinking back on that time, Chun-Inji's complexion darkened. No matter how strong he was physically and mentally, the memories of being tortured by them were so strong that it was etched into his bones. Grandfather. Chun Yuan had seen the revived body of Chun-Inji. In order to wash away the dirt on his body which had accumulated since getting caught, Chun Yuan had removed his clothes to clean him. Seeing the traces of torture, he could barely contain his anger. But it was foolish. I took the measures and thought that if I hold on and be patient, I would be able to get information about them. But the torture lasted for 10 long years, and it devastated him. In the pain which was inflicted on him, his pride and ego disappeared. At the end of the day, I learned nothing. Chun-Inji thought he could resist the worm in his head like Master Juam, but it didn't work out the way he wanted to. While the Yulin and the demonic cult were busy devising countermeasures, the Blade God 6 martial clan too were improving themselves. In order to grow, they too began to learn everything about their ancestors. They ended up closing off my internal energy flow for 10 years. As his internal energy was stopped, he couldn't force the worm out, and his body and mind, which had turned weak due to the torture, had no other choice but to lose. This is embarrassing, but I don't remember a single thing that I did under orders. But there was no way I could die either. Chun-Inji thought that he would never wake up from the control of the monsters, but it changed. Believing that he was completely brainwashed, he was placed into the spirit squad, and they began to use him in earnest. At that time, he was able to escape from a few orders given by using reverse health preservation. When I realized that I could get control of myself for a few seconds, despite being under their control, I began to figure out their purpose. However, since the entire Blade God 6 martial clan was made up of top-level warriors, deceiving them wouldn't be an easy task. Sometimes, it would take an entire month for Chun-Inji to regain consciousness, and as things happened, he gradually began to get confused. It seemed like the worm was getting used to my technique. The first time he used reverse health preservation, he could feel his vision clear up, but from one point on, everything was blurry, and the pain only increased. He guessed that Saint Guyong was in the same situation. Did you find anything? At the question, Chun-Inji shook his head. They are quite good at what they do. I couldn't understand more than half of anything they said because they were using code language and simplified Chinese characters so that information wouldn't leak out. Ah. No, simplified Chinese? At those words, something came to Chun Yuan's mind. Simplified Chinese was used to write a book called Treasure of Godliness, which was the direction for the Blade God 6 martial clan. If Chun Yuan could see those characters, he could read them with the help of Nano. Ah, it's a pity. If only Chun-Inji had escaped with it, Chun Yuan could have interpreted it, but considering the condition Chun-Inji was in, just getting out alive was enough. With regret, Chun-Inji spoke. Ugh, every time they would plan something, I took time to transcribe the letters. Is that true? At the puzzled question, Chun-Inji answered. No matter how impossible it was to interpret, I tried to figure out their true purpose, but would they let me live if they found out? The problem was to get the copies. As the spirit squad was put in the field, getting by information was tough. And there were many instances where the spirit squad wasn't around while the information was being relayed. But after a long wait, an opportunity came. To obtain the dragon turtle, I managed to learn that. Chun-Inji, who couldn't miss out on the opportunity he obtained after thousands of hardships, hid the copied paper in the Hubei province on his way to the north. He wanted to hide it close, but he had to do it discreetly due to surveillance. It was confusing, but from the investigation I did, this old man has to remember those cryptic words. Chen Youwen's eyes twinkled at those words. If the records of the Blade God were known, their real purpose could be discovered. What came next was the same as what Dan Baekhyun had said. Chun-Inji, who was temporarily released from control while dealing with the dragon, entrusted his slate and asked for help. Who would have known that you would come to save your grandfather like this? I think this is a blessing from Chun Ma. Grandfather. Chun-Inji's sincere voice made Chen Youwen choke. He was looking at the true leader of the Sky Demon Order. As they looked at each other drenched in their own emotions, Chen Youwen, who controlled himself, asked. By the way, earlier, you said that we shouldn't let the cores of the 5 spirit beasts fall into their hands. Is there any reason? To that, Chun-Inji replied with a serious expression. You might not believe this, but what they are doing, they want to attain the cores of the 5 spirit beasts to gain huge power. What do you mean? To gain eternal immortality. Eternal immorality? Eternal immortality. It literally means to enjoy life forever and never disappear. Eternal immortality? Former Lord, is that even possible? If what they were talking about was true, then it probably is. Huh. Mara Kim, who wouldn't normally show much reaction, was shocked. Immortality is known to be a myth, but if it was indeed true, then it was a good enough reason to spend as much time and resources as they had. Ah. Suddenly, something came to Youwen's mind. When Nano faced complications because of the dragon turtle's lightning, he ended up seeing things from the future. At that time, he heard of someone who was called the Blade God, who had reached the level of natural wonder by living close to 1,000 years. Right. If that Blade God I saw in the video was real, he must have attained immortality. Chen Youwen realized that what he saw in the video was true. That was when he became aware of one more fact. According to the original timeline, he must have obtained all 5 cores. A clear thing. But it isn't happening now because of Chen Youwen. Starting with the Amugi inside the Sky Demon Sword, then the Flame Qilin in the Royal Shrine, and now the Dragon Turtle and the spiritual power of the Great Bird, all were acquired by chance. Like someone set them. All the cores got absorbed by himself. Now all that was left was the core of the Feng Bo. And if what Chun-Inji was saying was true, if the core of Feng Bo could be obtained, Chen Youwen would gain eternal life. Ah. He didn't wish for immortality, but it was absurd to listen to. In a bright voice, someone spoke. This might be a good thing. If the head of that clan managed to gain immortality, the entire Wulin would have fallen into his hands. But I am glad that you have 3 cores. 4, huh? No. He was about to say 4, but decided to stay silent. Youwen. Thankfully you took in the core of the dragon, but the Blade Lord must have tried to get the core of the Great Bird from the Padala Palace. It was something that Chun-Inji heard the warriors of the Blade God's 6 martial clan talk about on their way to the Ice Palace, that the Blade Lord was going to Padala Palace to get the core of the Great Bird. Huh? Chen Youwen's eyes lit up. He had obtained the core of the Great Bird, but from what Chun-Inji said, there had to be another one alive. It could be because the divine object of the ice palace is too old. Chun-Inji, who didn't know that Yoan had obtained the core of the great bird, continued his story. If that person has obtained the core of the great bird, he will learn that the core of the dragon got taken away, and he will try to get the core of the Feng Bo, the last one. He felt that this situation had to be taken advantage of. You have taken 3, but that man, he is a monster who can't be compared to any master this old man has ever seen. Chun-Inji remembered the first time he went to the base. At that time, the Unjam, who were put into the spirit squad, and 20 masters attacked the Blade Lord. Chun-Inji, who was conscious at that time, thought it to be the best opportunity to get rid of him. But the results were shocking. 2 supreme masters and 18 superior masters worked together, but not one was able to touch the Blade Lord. Yoan. That man is a monster. If he obtains 2 cores, he will be stronger than you, who has 3 cores. It will be a tough fight. He'll have to fight to know the results. Apart from obtaining the last core, he wondered how strong the Blade Lord was. Chun-Inji thought that the situation had been used to their advantage. Hurry and take the core of Feng Bo and get ahead of him. If that happens, no matter how much he tries, he won't be able to handle you. Energy rose in Chun-Inji. The thought of his grandson obtaining 4 cores made him feel proud, and that way, the Blade Lord would have no chance against Yoan. Chun-Inji really considered this situation to be a blessing on the cult. Yoan. It must be fate that this old man lived all this time to see you. I'm grateful too. Not just that. Chun-Inji shook his head. This old man saw the sword of the Blade Lord. It isn't something that a human body can do. It wasn't wrong to say that the sword was something that transcends the limits of the human body. Chun-Inji brought up the main point. The only sword which can go against theirs is the sword force of the sky demon left behind by the ancestor. You must have seen that, right? Chun-Yoan nodded at that question. Behind the sapphire stone, he came to know about the sword. However, it was unfinished, not going beyond 5 forms. Before infiltrating the Blade God 6 martial clan, I tried to use the sword force of the sky demon. At least, I tried to make it into something which exerts more power. Chun-Inji considered his efforts as well spent. He was convinced that if Yoan could learn it, then he would be able to face the sword of the Blade God 6 martial clan. You need to hurry, and I will pass it to you today. I could only learn 70%, but with your abilities, the dead technique of the sword force of the sky demon can be saved. Chun-Inji said it with a smile. He was happy to think that he could fulfill his duties as grandfather and former lord. At that, Chun-Yoan had an embarrassed expression. Huh? What is it? He thought that his grandchild would be happy to learn the sword, but the reaction was different from what Chun-Inji had expected. Grandfather. I apologize. I have already found the method that was left on the sapphire stone monument and completed the sword force of the sky demon. What? Chun-Inji turned pale and yelled as he heard Yoan's words. His intentions turned into nothing in an instant. What has my grandchild been doing until now? His eyes were filled with despair and humiliation at the same time. How would Chun-Inji react if Chun-Yoan said that he combined the sky demon sword and extreme art of the blade god into a new sword technique? Chapter 438. To Changbai Mountains. Part 4. The 5th day after the former Lord Chun-Inji woke up. After finishing their journey to the North Sea Ice Palace, Chun-Yoan and the people of the demonic cult began to head back to Jianhu, despite wanting to head back right after he woke up. It was because they had come across 2 problems. The first was Chun-Inji's body was severely damaged and needed time to recover. Then, grandfather, I will show you the sword force of the sky demon and then imbue energy into you. But the man refused, saying that his way was better than the cult's way. As said, Chun In-ji managed to efficiently use the reverse health preservation and started to move within 3 days. The second problem was the demand for food. Although the cult did suffer casualties during the battle with the dragon and the Yulin, the remaining people still needed food, and more than 500 men were still alive. In the process of going to the North Sea Ice Palace, the demonic cult had used up all their food, so they had to fill up before they could head back. If the North Sea Ice Palace hadn't collapsed, it would have been a lot easier to replenish their food. Master, won't you stay a little longer? Baek Hyun, the new king of the palace, suggested that Chen Yowan stay longer, but Yowan, who had already done everything he could inside the palace, had no time to spare. Chen Yowan said it was because they had to head to Liaoning Castle right away. Moreover, if the demonic cult's men continued to stay on the island, it wouldn't do any good for Baek Hyun, who had to unite the palace officials. You're talking nonsense. No. Why would I talk nonsense? There is still a lot to learn. I taught you everything that I could teach. I have also passed down the method for the ice cold of heaven. Later, I'll check and see if you've learned it properly. Huh? At Chen Yowan's words, Baek Hyun couldn't hide his emotions. He liked the feeling of finally being able to enjoy his freedom after Yowan left, but Yowan's last words felt like a stab in his back. To check? You're my first disciple. I won't ignore you that easily. Although he only taught the ice cold of heaven to Baek Hyun was still his disciple. It was Chen Yowan's smooth ploy to take the North Sea Ice Palace under his wing, and as long as Baek Hyun was his disciple, there was no way he could rebel. 5 members of the 6 swordsmen, the unit under the 6 swords, will reside here, and I will periodically check if you're neglecting your training or not through them. I will not disappoint you. Baek Hyun answered with a pale face. TCH. Chen Yowan clicked his tongue internally. While teaching Baek Hyun, Chen Yowan understood one thing about him. Although Baek Hyun lacked basic talent, he didn't have any interest in learning the family technique despite being from the royal family. Dan Jushin, who was now in the demonic cult, was also disappointed about that. Although Baek Hyun had the legitimacy and the support, if the future of the Ice Palace was considered, then Dan Jushin was much more qualified to be the king. Well, maybe luck does play a major role? Baek Hyun was someone who had luck on his side. If he hadn't met Chun In-ji, the former lord of the demonic cult, then nothing good would have happened to him. Lord. All the preparations are done. Good work. Mara Kim announced that they were all ready. Chen Yowan, who told Baek Hyun to not neglect his training, got on the boat. Hu Bong, the lieutenant, spoke to Chen Yowan, who got on the ship and walked towards the boat's head. Lord, since we took the palace under our wing, wouldn't it be better to change the name of the North Sea? For example, Sky Demon North Branch. Kia, wouldn't that be a kill? Tak. Ok. Hu Bong, who was hit on the back of his head, turned to see Ho Sang-hwa, one of the 6 swords, looking at him with a sneer on her face. Yeah. Do you think my head is a drum? It was a wail along with a warning. Be careful about what you say. Lieutenant. Hu Bong. Hu Bong, who listened to Ho Sang-hwa's words, decided to keep his mouth shut. On the ship, which crossed the lake, there were new members of the demonic cult. Dan Jushin, who turned into the 3rd Great Elder, and the royals who followed him. From the elders of the North Sea Ice Palace, Elder Seol Young Gwi and 2 others joined Dan Jushin. However, Chen Yowan didn't care about it. Even if 3 elders decided to come with me, what would happen to the North Sea Ice Palace? Understood. We will consider this as the final order from the former deputy king. Of course, Chen Yowan had no intention of letting Dan Jushin gather supporters until he could trust him. Still, in order to save Dan Jushin's face, around 100 of his supporters were allowed to follow him. However, there were two other people, besides the ones from the Ice Palace. Mississippi. What are we supposed to do? It was Moyang Yu, son of Moyang Kong, who sent the telepathic message in an anxious tone. The person he sent it to was Jigul Sohee, the second head of the Yulin contingent, who was standing next to him. Why were they staying in the palace instead of returning back with the Yulin troops, which left the Ice Palace 3 days ago? Don't worry too much, Lord Moyang. As long as we are being considered hostages, no one will harm us too easily. That cold-blooded person? Moyang Yu shuddered. They were being held as hostages of the Yulin while letting the rest of the contingent leave. At first, Chen Yuan tried to deal with those who tried to take the core of the dragon, but then he decided that clashing with the Yulin wouldn't do any good and decided to take hostages from them. Because the Blade God's 6 martial clan still has to be dealt with. Moyang Kong was humiliated, yet he accepted it. To save his troops. Fortunately, Chen Yuan said that he would decide whether to release the hostages or not after discussing it with the great leader of the forces of justice. Miss Jigul. I think that we should escape when the chance comes. We don't know when that cold-blooded monster will change his mind and decide to cut our arms off or kill us. With all that happened, Moyang Yu was extremely scared of Chen Yuan. Even in their first meeting, he knew that Chen Yuan was stronger than him, but now he was plain terrified. Do you think you can escape? Jigul Sohee responded with a question. She understood Moyang Yu's feelings, but how could they escape from the monster's hand? Do not give up, Miss Jigul. It said that even when the sky falls, there will be an opening for us to rise, but when an opportunity arises, should we at least try? Lord Moyang, Eik. Even before he could complete it, someone had called for Moyang Yu. The one who approached him was Baki, one of the 6 swords, who stood with a calm face. Moyang Yu, who was trying to come up with plans to escape, stuttered. What is it? The Lord is calling for you. Lo Lord Chen? Why? I didn't do anything and stayed quiet. Moyang Yu looked terrified as Jigul Sohee shook her head. Ugh, how do you plan on escaping? Lord Moyang. There was nothing he could do against the lord of the demonic cult, Chen Yuan, but to at least plan an escape, he should be less frightened. You'll find out when you come. Moyang Yu, who was called over, turned white in front of Chen Yuan. To him, Chen Yuan asked. I heard that the Moyang clan is from the Liaoning province? It wasn't a question he thought he would be asked. He was worried that Chen Yuan was planning to become the hegemon of the Moyang clan. Contrary to his concerns. When we arrive in Liaoning, guide me to Changbai Mountain. Huh? Changbai Mountain? The purpose of Chen Yuan's summon was for him to guide them. That evening, the demonic castle in the 10,000 mountains. Chen Yuzhong, who had recovered a lot, was able to move freely. His recent routine was to receive treatment in the morning and restore his internal energy in the afternoon. He was recovering to his original state with steady efforts. A guest had come to visit him while he was training in the room. It was the right guardian, Subming. Subming, who seemed different from usual, visited him to deliver good news. Did they find my father? Chen Yuzhong couldn't hide his surprise at the news which was delivered to him. The man had gone missing 20 years ago, and he assumed that he was dead. But that didn't seem to be the case. Don't be so shocked. Lord didn't just find the former Lord, but he also managed to make the North Sea Ice Palace affiliated with the cult. What? He asked Chen Yuzhong to not be surprised, but it would be weird if he wasn't. Although Chen Yuzhong went through numerous wars since he gained power, he never got such results. The North Sea Ice Palace? Huh. And Chen Yuan was really amazing. He changed the state religion shortly after becoming the Lord and then turned the capital into a realm of the demonic cult. And he even managed to get North Sea Ice Palace into his own hands. Isn't this because his conviction was recognized that they decided to turn into disciples of our Lord? Such great news for our cult. Chuckle. Right Guardian, Subming was excited as he talked about it. Seeing him like that, Chen Yuzhong thought of his dead wife. Weian, your child is much better than me. He never dreamed that the new Lord would be so talented. He would have liked it if she was alive to see this day. Still, it was supposed to be a happy day. He even thought of having a drink after a long time. I feel nice. Right Guardian. Since you brought me good news, get some alcohol. Crash. Before he finished what he was saying, Chen Yuzhong threw sword chi to the window. He was so rushed that the sword chi hadn't taken the shape of a sword and stayed near the half-opened window. For former lord? Tat. Crack. Right Guardian, Subming, who was puzzled as he saw Chen Yuzhong leave through the window, followed him. Chen Yuzhong's eyes narrowed as he looked around the garden in front of the residence, which was lit by torches. What are you doing? Chen Yuzhong tilted his head to answer Subming's question. I thought someone was eavesdropping on our conversation. Maybe I was mistaken. Huh? What do you mean? Despite the 6 swords not being present, this residence was supposed to be heavily guarded. Moreover, even though he wasn't fully recovered, Chen Yuzhong was still a former member of the 5 strongest warriors. Maybe it is because your internal energy is damaged. Phew. Come on in. I guess so. Chen Yuzhong shook his head and went back into the residence with Subming. On top of the 10,000 mountains, not far from the castle. Whoa. At the top of the peak, the land shook with blue light. Chi-chi-chick. The space seemed to crackle. In the empty space, what seemed to be a fabric made of some unique material disappeared and reappeared repeatedly. CRCK. Damn it. A person with unique colored clothes appeared where no one was present. There was something there from the beginning, but it just looked like no one was there. Drip. His clothes were cut below the waist, and blood was dripping. I should have been completely invisible to the naked eye, but to notice me, he is a monster. Despite approaching them carefully, he got caught. The man with unique colored clothes looked at his cut and saw smoke rising from a square bag he had. Ugh. The man took it out of the bag and threw it with all his might. Bang. Woo. The circular smoking object flew through the air and was soon sucked into space with a roaring sound. The man who looked at it mumbled. Damn it, one is gone. Thud. The man, who sat on the floor, looked at the other 2 circular objects in the bag, both identical to the one thrown before. He shook his head, knowing his original plan had gone awry. The man who sighed mumbled. Ah, the original plan has gone to waste. I can't walk from here. I might get caught. Beep. 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 At that time, a strange mechanical beeping sound came from the bracelet on the man's hand. Annoyed. TCH, did they already detect me just because I used 2? They're fast. The man hurriedly took out another circular object from the bag and did something, then space shook with blue light, and his figure disappeared.